Take a moment and think about this. Did you notice how expensive everything has become lately? Gas, groceries, rent, even the small things you used to ignore now feel heavier on your wallet. It's not just you. Almost everyone feels it. And usually when we talk about rising prices, we hear the same explanations. Inflation, supply chains, global crises. All of that is true. But there's another layer to this story that people don't always connect directly to their daily lives, and that's government spending, especially during long wars. Now, I'm not saying wars are the only reason prices go up. That would be too simple. Economies are complex. But history shows something interesting. When countries spend massive amounts of money over long periods, especially using debt, those costs don't just stay in the background. They tend to show up later in ways people actually feel. Let's start with Afghanistan. This was a war that lasted nearly 20 years. For many people, it became something distant, almost like background noise. But financially, it was anything but small. Estimates suggest the total cost exceeded $2.3 trillion. And here's the important part. Most of that wasn't paid up front. It was borrowed. Now, borrowing isn't unusual. Governments do it all the time. But over time, it adds up. As of today, U.S. national debt has passed $39 trillion. If you break that down, it's over $100,000 per person. Of course, not all of that comes from war, but wars like Afghanistan are part of that bigger picture. And the real issue isn't just the number itself, it's what comes with it: interest. Because when you borrow at that scale, you don't just repay the original amount, you keep paying for it year after year. Some economists argue that this creates long-term pressure on the economy. Others say a large economy like the U.S. can manage it. But even among experts, there's one thing most agree on. Debt doesn't disappear, it shifts forward in time. Now let's talk about Iraq. When it started, the estimates were relatively low, around $60 billion. But over time, the real cost grew, and eventually passed $3 trillion. And just like Afghanistan, the story didn't end when the war slowed down. There are ongoing costs, especially veteran care, which can last decades. One thing people often point out is how these long-term obligations are rarely visible in the beginning. They show up slowly. At the same time, global oil markets reacted strongly during that period, and that matters more than people think. Because energy isn't just one sector, it's connected to everything. When oil prices go up, transportation becomes more expensive. When transportation gets expensive, food prices follow. And suddenly, the cost of living starts creeping up. Now, to be fair, not every price increase comes from war or oil. There are always multiple factors. But when large spending and energy shocks happen at the same time, they can amplify each other. And that's when people really start to feel it. If you zoom out and look at the bigger picture, post-9/11 conflicts are estimated to have cost around $8 trillion in total. That includes direct spending and long-term commitments. And here's something that often gets overlooked. The cost is still growing. Interest payments alone are expected to continue for decades. Some projections even suggest trillions more by 2050. This brings us to a simple but important idea. Debt is not static. It compounds. And as it grows, it starts limiting choices. Governments have to decide, where do we spend? What do we cut? What do we delay? And those decisions eventually affect infrastructure, education, healthcare, and everyday life. Now let's come to the present. Rising tensions involving Iran have already started to impact both spending and markets. In a very short time, billions of dollars have been committed. At the same time, oil prices reacted almost immediately.
We've seen scenarios where prices move above $100 per barrel, and in some cases even higher projections. And if you've been following energy markets, you already know what that means. Higher fuel costs, more expensive logistics, and eventually higher prices across the board. For households, this doesn't happen overnight, but over weeks and months it adds up. You start noticing it in your daily routine, at the gas station, at the supermarket, on your monthly bills. So what happens next? That's the difficult part because no one really knows for sure. It depends on how long tensions last, how governments respond, and most importantly, how all of this is financed. If spending continues to rise and is mostly debt-funded, it could increase pressure on the broader economy. Some economists warn about long-term risks like persistent inflation or slower growth. Others argue that large, developed economies have the tools to manage these challenges. The truth is probably somewhere in between. But if there's one thing history consistently shows, it's this. Large financial decisions made at the top don't stay there. They eventually move down into the real economy. And that brings us to the bigger question. Afghanistan, Iraq, and now new global tensions. Different times, different contexts, but similar financial patterns. So the real question isn't just about war or politics, it's about connection. How do these large, complex decisions translate into something as simple and as personal as the price you pay every day? There isn't a single answer, but understanding the pattern might help you see things more clearly. Now I'm curious what you think. Do you believe these patterns will continue, or do you think this time things might play out differently? Let me know in the comments.